Yes, recording. All right. So, um, hello, everybody. If I haven't said hello, I am so glad you are here tonight with me. I will also tell you that I have a head cold or allergies or something. I feel like yick. So tonight, as you're doing your presentation, I'm going to really rely on you to have that conversation with each other as much as possible. I'll probably take a little bit of a back burner to it. Then in other words, I won't be usually interrupting you as much as I usually do. So that's a good thing, I suppose. But I do ask you to engage with each other and make it meaningful for everyone. Before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about where we are in Blackboard. I apologize too for the mistake I made on the presentations. I had March the 30th, which is a Saturday, and I don't think any of you want to meet with me on Saturday. But if you do, I can Zoom in with you. So that was really meant to be March the 20th. So I do hope the 5 of you are prepared for that. I did send you an email yesterday when it was brought to my attention, but that is all my fault. So I guess Lindsay, Shantae, Courtney, Annie, and Daryl, are you all ready? Would you be ready tonight for that? Anyone not? Let me ask that because of the mistake. Okay. So we can talk about it. Well, let me bring you up to a couple of things before we get started. By the way, we are really pushing. We are almost done. When we meet, our next meeting, of course, is our face-to-face meeting. And look at this. This should be March. Oh, here it is. March the 30th is our face-to-face meeting 5. And after our is our session 5. And then our next face-to-face is on April the 6th and the 7th in Charlotte. And looking forward to that. What we're going to do on that date, and here's what we have a plan for that. We're going to talk about advocacy. We're going to talk about, now that you understand, and hopefully you do, have a better understanding of the law, the basis of all of our policies, and have a good understanding of how all of it fits together. The next piece is, now that you know, what do you do with it? And as a superintendent or as an assistant superintendent, if you're not out there, even as a principal, if you're not there advocating for different positions that you feel strongly about, you really aren't doing all of your job. And it's very uncomfortable for us sometimes to perhaps look power in the face and say we disagree. But more important now, in this day and age when public schools are under attack, it's more important that we do it now. So on this face-to-face session, our next meeting, we'll start at 9 o'clock, and we'll start talking about advocacy. There'll be some activities for you to participate in, but the bottom line, when you walk away from that, I really want you to have a really good understanding of, you know, all this stuff, your obligations, because it's not really something that you get to pick and choose. Because trust me, when you become an assistant superintendent or the superintendent, you are going to be put in many positions where you have to be an advocate. And you're going to have to speak from the heart, and you're going to have to oftentimes just speak from the moment. And you are going to have to be able to verbalize that. And you're going to have to get in there and play games and play politics with the people. So that's why we're going to spend a lot of time on advocacy. The last part of the exercise is going to be on your PAPs. And I noticed that a couple of you have started on your policy analysis plan. I hope you're moving along on that. What I plan to do on the last day of our next face-to-face is really for us to start talking about that, doing some peer review. So when you come on April the 6th, bring everything on your own files, bring everything you have for your PAP. Because at that point, we're going to do some peer review, and we're going to look at where you are. And I hope that at that point, we'll almost be ready to start submitting those things and saying, and it'll almost be ready 100%. So we're going to do advocacy and the PAP peer review and audit. So that's the weekend. All right, so tonight we are in Zoom session 5. And wait a minute, where am I? Hang on a minute, everybody. All right, we have presentations, and I have added, let me see if it's in this next one. Okay. Look for a little bit later on tonight when we're doing the presentations. I'm going to have added to 708. I added this to 700, but not 708. We're going to have a little section on digital learning. I'm not going to speak a lot about it tonight, but what you'll have there is a model for administrators on how to be able to observe digital learning, the appropriate use of digital learning in your classrooms. You will also have a wonderful website that's put out by ISTL, which has a bunch of resources for you as a curriculum leader or as an administrator. Is a bunch of resources that you can go to download some options for your digital learning, some examples of it, as well as having some resources for your classroom teachers or and other administrators in your district. So I'll make sure I put those over there. All right. I am going to stop sharing. And so I believe, Lindsay, you are up first. Is that correct? And if you want to
yes, sir.
Start sharing and take over the screen.
Okay. Okay, can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, so I can. Okay, I had chapter 5, individuals with disabilities. This was a very interesting chapter. It was actually a refresher for me. A lot of you guys in administrative positions are very much familiar with this chapter. A lot of information to put into such a short presentation, but I did try to highlight all the importance that I could.
It's a huge topic, Courtney.
Yes.
Lindsay, I'm sorry. It's a huge topic. And, sorry, Courtney. I thought you were going to be doing this one.
It's okay. So basically, in 1975, Congress decided to work with all the states because they had received some research regarding the children in the United States. It was found that 8 million children in the U.S. with disabilities had needs that weren't being met. Over 1 million of those children had not received any type of public educational opportunity, but there was also roughly 4 million of those children were not receiving an equal educational opportunity. Therefore, that's when Congress enacted the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. The amount of children classified as disabled or having special needs have increased steadily through the years. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act is undergone several changes. In 1990, it was changed into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. In 2004, it was referred to as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. But even with all these changes, the Act kept its primary purpose. Individuals with disabilities are protected by the IDEA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. There were two major cases referred to in this chapter, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children versus Commonwealth and Mills versus Board of Education. Both of these cases took place in 1970s. Basically, with the court rulings, the Pennsylvania case, it ruled that the state's children with mental retardation were entitled to a free public education, and they should be educated in regular classrooms instead of being isolated in other classrooms. In the Mills versus Board of Education, the ruling given down was that no child who is eligible for public education in the District of Columbia shall be excluded from regular public schools unless adequate alternative educational services were provided to meet the needs of those children. So basically, these two cases, combined with political pressure, made way for federal funds to be dispersed, extensive regulations to be put in place so that students with disabilities are provided equal access to a free and appropriate public education. There are mandatory requirements that school districts have to follow. There's specific regulations as far as providing financial assistance to the school districts. Students with disabilities from the age of 3 to 21 are protected on the IDEA. And, each state is required to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities who are in need of early intervention or any special education service. President Bush, he reauthorized IDEA 2004. He made it the Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act. And under this act, each state had to adopt, or they have to have a plan of action that describes the goals, graduation, and dropout rates for these exceptional kids. Each state must establish a policy that ensures that due process rights for all children with disabilities are maintained and followed. The act also provides formulas for allocating funds to state and local education agencies and per pupil expenditures based on the school year or the current school year. But each district has to submit an application to the state and demonstrate how it will comply with the requirements of IDEA. Each district should have plans available. If citizens were to want to see it, they would want them on your website for review. When it comes to children with disabilities, they look at mental retardation, hearing impairments, speech and language impairments, visual impairments such as blindness, learning disabilities, emotional disturbance, autism, or orthopedic impairments. There were many others that the chapter also talked about. As far as teacher qualifications in this section, it just basically reiterated that candidates must earn a special education certificate or pass a state licensing exam, but they also should have the license to teach special education. But it's up to the regular classroom teachers to observe and identify students who may need special educational services. The teacher must be certain that continuous and multiple efforts have failed to meet the needs of the identified students. Teachers then complete the referral form when he or she is convinced that a student needs special services regarding their education. Multi-tiered system of support and RTI, response intervention. Basically, it's a combination of assessments and interventions used to provide early interventions to at-risk students. RTI is meant to minimize academic failures based on early interventions and intensive research-based instructional interventions. There's 3 tiers in the MTSS process. Tier 1 basically covers core instruction. Tier 2 provides more of an intense individualized instruction. Tier 3 involves intensive instructional strategies and also interventions to improve or try to improve the student's academic progress.
Lindsay, before you go on, let me ask just to throw it out there to the group, because all of you, every one of you has had experience with RTI and MTSS, right? I mean, that's pretty much a common standard for North Carolina. Shante, in your experience, and Courtney, in different states, have they, I know you had it in Charlotte Meck, but has South Carolina and has Georgia adopted the MTSS tier system or the RTI?
Yes, this is their first year adopting it. They're doing pilot. They're piloting it at our school, actually at several turnaround schools. But yes, this is their first year.
Okay. Courtney?
Yes, the district I work for uses it and has used it for years.
Okay. So just to stop here for just a moment, what's your impression of it? Because when we adopted it in Caldwell County, where I was superintendent, there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of pushback from teachers who, well, I don't know exactly. Well, I guess I can. Well, I guess I want you to help me. Do you have any pushback, or do you get pushback, or how has it been accepted in your district?
We have a lot of pushback, especially at my individual school, as I'm one of the people who have to enforce getting it done. It's a lot of extra work on top of their normal tier 1 students. The tier 2 students, especially in the turnaround school, there's a lot of tier 2 and tier 3. So the amount of time that it takes to go through those interventions, just to go back and say, oh, that intervention didn't work, go try another one. That intervention didn't work, go try another one. So by the time you get to testing, you have tried so many interventions, and the teacher by that time is frustrated, the student's frustrated. It's a long process, and it might not end up anywhere at the end. And it's supposed to be where you're not getting students into special education. You're trying to use all the interventions to keep them from special education, but teachers really don't understand that whole process.
So is most of the work in the tier 2? Because
Yes.
That's probably where the bulk of your students are. That's kind of what I heard in Caldwell County, in that you're asking us to do a lot of work, and then the work's not paying. because I think originally it was thought of, well, this was going to be the way to get the child into exceptional children, when that's really the antithesis of what it really is. It's really about keeping the child from getting to that tier 3. Anybody else have an experience where it was not necessarily well received?
I will agree with Shantae. I don't think that it's a basis of well received. It's more of the time piece. And we've spent a lot of time on tier 2, and we've got that. I believe we've got that system down in place, as well as the neighboring districts around Kannapolis, but it's still finding the time to do the tier 3 intensive interventions on top of the tier 2 and then on top of teaching core. You've got to have supports for teachers. But that puts a lot of pressure on our teachers, and we can't make up time, and right now they're pressed for time. So if anything, MTSS has made several teachers, especially in Kannapolis, want more time in the school day because they just don't have enough time to get everything in.
All right, let me ask this to just throw it out there. Could that possibly be one of the reasons why? Because when you look at the teacher retention data, or why teachers leave districts, you get a lot of extra paperwork, a lot of extra things I have to do that really aren't teaching. Anyone?
I would very much echo Josh and Shantae that this is a court, or it complements some of our turnover. We don't have the manpower. It's a very complex system. I personally, and I think our principals like it because it's not a gateway to EC. And we've done, I think, in KCS, a really good job of identifying research-based interventions that complement certain deficits and strategies, but we just don't have the time to implement them or the extra personnel to come in and support. So a lot of it's the know-how, or the will is there. It's just the now what. We don't have the people or the time. So that's where our frustration lies. It's not with the system itself, because I do like how they've blended academics and behavior under one umbrella, because we have just as many students in the behavior support tiers that we do as academics. It's just, it boils down to people and time.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to add? If not, we'll go ahead. Lindsay?
Okay. When students are referred, school officials should make sure they're consistent with state and federal regulations. If a student is classified during a conference, then working collaboratively, of course, with the parent, the development of an IEP occurs, but the parent must sign and agree on the placement of the student outside the regular classroom. A student's IEP includes educational performance of the student, short-term and annual goals for the student, a description of specific educational services, and a description of transitional services that's going to be offered to the student. And of course, the timeline for when these services will occur, and the description of the services. Each IEP must be reviewed and revised annually. If any changes are made to a student's IEP, parents, of course, have to agree with the changes. As far as administrative guidelines, school districts should ensure that children with disabilities in their district be provided equal access to a public education. Parental rights must be respected at all times and addressed in matters relating to the evaluation and the IEP development. Children with disabilities should not be disciplined for behavior that seems to be associated with their disability. The burden of proof rests with the school district in determining whether misbehavior by a student with disabilities is attributed to the said disability. So those two run hand in hand. School districts may be required to provide educational services beyond the regular school year, depending on what exactly the student needs. School districts, they may be assessed attorney fees under the Handicapped Children's Protection Act if a parent prevails in a suit against IDEA. Children with disabilities should not be disciplined for behavior that, once again, is associated with their disabilities. As far as Americans with Disability Act, it prohibits employment discrimination by employers with 15 or more employees. School districts should develop non-discriminatory policies regarding individuals with disabilities. School districts should not segregate or limit job opportunities for individuals based on those disabilities. School officials should not deny employment to individuals with disabilities to avoid providing reasonable accommodations. And of course, school districts should maintain employee medical records regarding specific disabilities or all learning disabilities.
Okay, quick question before the next one. Let me just pick on you, Daryl. When I say ADA, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right. And so what does it mean for you as a high school assistant principal?
Basically means that no one with a disability can be discriminated against, and they must have equal opportunity and access under the law, under the 14th Amendment.
All right, very good. And so that means that, have you ever had to spend some money on facilities that you didn't have because you had to make it wheelchair accessible? Are you on an older building, Daryl, or a fairly new building?
Our building was built in 1951.
Ah, okay. So you have a lot of ADA adjustments probably. Do you have an elevator?
No, sir.
Really? Okay. But you do have ramps and you do have all that, because generally when it hits at the principal level, most of us think of, or district-wide people think of it being more of an accommodations that we have to make in order to make the physical plant a little bit more. So all those times that the district comes out and does something to make it ADA compliant, it is to make sure that students with disabilities have equal access to your facilities. So it really has probably taken more of a physical fix-it type in your buildings than it really has other things. Now, the ADA also, though, can get into some of the instructional things, but mostly for most administrators, and when you become a superintendent or assistant superintendent, when you think of ADA, you're going to be thinking of what pot of money am I going to pull to put an elevator into this 1951-year-old school, because I now have 3 kids in wheelchairs that have to get up to that second floor. So ADA for most of us in the district really deals with, or the district level deals with, the money that we've got to do to make sure our facility is adequate to be able to up to par for everyone. It could be very well be at whether or not you have women facilities for the women's team in your gym, because those are protected as well through ADA and Title IX. Thanks, Daryl. All right.
Dr. Stone.
Yes.
All right. If they're not able to do it, can they find a school and get transportation or something to another school that offers it?
You can do that, but it is, if that's the absolutely only options you have, but that's probably going to cost you a lot more to have to transport somebody across town. So, and I would say that if a parent was satisfied with it, because this is really where parents will take you to the carpet. If I was a parent and the school was two streets down the road from me, no, I wouldn't be sitting in your office, Shantae, and letting you talk about sending my child across town. I want you to fix that building, because that's where her friends go. That's where she's been going all her career. That's where I want her to go. So in ADA, parents do a lot of driving. Now, a district can say, we just absolutely can't do it, and try to have accommodations, and sometimes you can win on that. But I would recommend, and I would seriously recommend that you would try to fix it right away, particularly when it comes to barriers. That's what they are, barriers. Anybody have any experience with an OCR complaint related to ADA compliance or exceptional children?
In reflecting on your example, Dr. Stone, we did have to modify a bathroom for a student. We had to include some railings in the bathroom, and it had to be accessible for that student's wheelchair. So we actually had to move the entire AU population to a different part of the building and then modify a bathroom to fit their needs.
And you're right. You probably had to move staff to try to move that to a place where that child can have easy access to. So if your building was built after the 1980s or mid 1990s, in between that time frame, you probably are going to have to make some ADA compliant issues. You are going to have ramps. You're going to have elevators. You're going to have broader halls or wider halls for wheelchairs to get down, or make some kinds of changes, or even lockers. Now, the big thing now is to have lockers where someone in a wheelchair can easily have access to without having to reach up or being certainly at eye level and help that child get that, as well as water fountains. I mean, when you think about a child in a wheelchair, there are a lot of barriers in our school that we put in place that are there just based by the physical structure that keeps that child from being successful. Has anyone ever been in a Office of the Civil Rights investigation because of your treatment or something about exceptional children? Annie, have you ever been involved in that at the district? She may have stepped away. Well, let me tell you, if it happens, you're in for a treat. In Caldwell County, when I was superintendent, we have had, in the 12 years I was there, we probably had 10 Office of Civil Rights. And that's not because we were so bad about it, but anybody can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. And it's not necessarily black and white. It doesn't have to be related to race. It could be related to anything. And so what we discovered in our Office of Civil, in the Civil Rights, and usually it does come under the Exceptional Children's Capacity or programs or the ADA or the 504 plans or homeless children. Those tend to be where it really hits us hard. But you'll find that when you get into the superintendent's office, and I want to ask Annie about this in a minute, when you get into that central office, your district will probably go through 1 or 2 a year. And when you have to do an OCR complaint, it is paperwork, because the Office of Civil Rights, which is in the Department of Education for us, requires all sorts of documentations. And if they agree to take a case, even before they take a case, when something has been sent to them, they will send out fillers and seeking information from you. And already you're going to have to start turning around information. And in every one of these 10 that we had in the 10 years or the 12 years that I was there, we had to do a response. Now, we weren't found guilty or we weren't found that we deliberately did something, but in all cases, there was some substance to what the Office of Civil Rights said that we needed to adjust. We need to do more training. I mean, we had some EC teachers who, I don't know if the IEP meant anything to them or not. And we had to do some additional training. So the Office of Civil Rights is not automatically against us as a school system, but when you deal with them, they are going to require a lot of justification and a lot of documentation and a lot of training on your part. Annie, I was asking, have you as a district administrator ever had to deal with an Office of Civil Rights complaint about exceptional children?
Director, we have quite a bit, and 80% of the time it is the EC teacher not meeting the IEP requirements. A lot of times it's more or less secondary because they just get lost in the shuffle. And embarrassingly, on our end, there have been some students that have not even. So that's where we usually get caught. Not malicious intent, oversight, and yeah.
Simple mistakes. But when you're dealing with someone's child and they already are identified as exceptional, you're dealing with their life. And so yeah. When you become that superintendent or associate superintendent, or you become the director of EC, you need to realize first and foremost that you're going to have a heavy plate because this is their baby. And they've had to deal with them being exceptional all their life. You just are having to deal with it in the school setting. They have to deal with it in life. So it is their baby, and they take it very seriously. And they are going to be demanding a lot of things from you, and we should give them. I mean, they have the rights to them as well. But when we have an IEP, that's a legal agreement. That is a legal document that we have with that parent. So there should be no reason that we don't honor that. I had, in one of my other classes, a principal refused to let EC child go out for PE. Now, the principal was thinking that this child was in a wheelchair, that it probably wouldn't do them any good, that they would probably have better time if they had on their computer or if they had adaptive course or something. But that went all the way, and that was very nasty, because why would you not want that child in that wheelchair out with the other children to socialize, for fun, and for other things? So really be careful, because the EC is really going to get you if you don't have your training for your staff and you don't hold your EC staff to the highest of standards, because it is where most court cases come from, and the most expensive court cases. And also remember, as a superintendent or assistant superintendent, when you get there, you need to have some really good training with your staff so that when they go into those IEP meetings, because I doubt Annie's ever been in the IEP meeting as a district representative, but when someone goes into the IEP meeting, that's a contract. And so if you contract to give that child a nurse all day, who's paying for it? The district. And so if the district hasn't been involved in that conversation and you've gone ahead and made this commitment, someone from the district is going to visit you, I would imagine. So in our IEP meetings, this is where, I guess I don't want to frighten you in it, but this is where we spend a lot of time in the central office dealing with IEP and exceptional children. All right. Any questions on this? Before we go with Shante, who's up next, let me go back and show you. I've added them, the things that I wanted you to see. Here is the digital learning. This is a site or a document that would be useful for you in your dealing with its PowerPoint presentation. It's a very short little PowerPoint presentation. If my throat wasn't killing me, I would probably want to go over it with you, but I'm not. It's here. I've opened it, but it really tells you how to model digital leadership, whether you are an administrator in the school building or whether you're an administrator in the district. It is important that all of North Carolina's standards for principals and superintendents now has a huge emphasis on digital leadership and digital learning. So look at this at some point and understand that you have a great opportunity to model it. The other site that I have on this that I've added and opened is the this website for you, and it's a great website. It's by Itzel, and within it, if you really want to delve into what digital learning is and how it is applicable to the 21st century administrator and classroom, it's got some wonderful capstones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a great article. Over here, you also have some tech basics, some digital age teaching and learning. I don't know what your district, I'm sure your districts are well involved in the digital learning piece, but if you ever wanted to become an expert on what's going on or what is needed for the 21st century administrator, this website is exceptional. And it is now open to you and in the right place. All right. So I have Shantae's up. I need to stop sharing, Shante. Thank you, Lindsay. And I really do apologize, folks, that I don't feel good. I'm sorry about that. But at least I'm not there coughing on you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I say hello, everyone. Get
They're
off
all
of me.
muted.
Hello.
I know.
Oh,
Wave your hand or something. at me.
Hi, Shantae.
Hi, I miss you all.
We miss you too, and we love you, Shantae.
I love you all. Love you so much. Chapter 6, school personnel and school district liability. One that we can anybody speak on why school officials are held to a higher standard than almost anybody in the world, even probably the president, seems like. Anybody would like to speak to why we have a higher expectations and liable for more things than anyone?
We have children's lives at stake and their lives are in our hands.
Right. So that's what this chapter is about. Where we fall this as school personnel and the liability that we as employees and the school district hold.
Shante, I'll say also that this is the second, if not first, after EC area in which you will probably be sued at some point in your life. So get ready for it.
Oh Lord.
Oh yes.
No, I don't have any money. I'm gonna have to file bankruptcy.
I can't. Well, actually, if you're a government employee and you're doing it on duty, you kind of have immunity for it. But they can still go after you, your personal stuff. But I cannot tell you how many times I've had to deal with personnel issues. And oh my gosh, you're going to so much enjoy this when you get into the central office. Oh, you're going to love it. If people would only behave.
Bankruptcy is gonna be high for me. Okay. School districts as well as school officials and employees can be liable for tortious acts that result in student injury. Let me move this. A tort is the actionable or civil wrong committed against a person by another person independent of contract. Liability may result from deliberate acts committed by a person or act involving negligence. Some school setting torts can result in class action suits affecting a number of school employees. I know we had a class action suit here in Atlanta for Atlanta Public School for the cheating scandal, but totally different. But it was a suit by the whole district. Class actions involving a single teacher, principal, board member, etc. Educators commit torts when they violate a legally imposed duty that results in injury to students, and the courts will determine who's liable. To the greatest extent possible, educators are tasked with ensuring that students are safe while under their care. In cases involving student injuries, courts will determine if school officials are liable or if they took the appropriate actions to prevent students from injury. So just for example, I can think of many times when we're not paying attention to students on the playground and they get hurt.
Can I interject, Shante?
You sure can.
That is exactly where you're going to get burned, because that is a deliberate failure, neglect of duty. Now, if you can show that you were watching and the teachers weren't sitting over there in a huddle talking, but you were actually watching and you had warned little Stevie about being on that particular playground equipment time after time again, and you'd gone and removed me from the situation, then you've got a better case. But school systems lose so much money on times when we deliberately don't do what we should be doing. Now, for you as a principal, for you as a district officer, one of the things that you need to do, principals first, if someone comes to you and tells you that your playground material is unsafe and that there's a screw loose and you put it on the back burner, wham, they got you if something happens. So immediately, when something comes to your attention that could be safety or security, you need to put it priority. And playgrounds are the worst place in elementary that we have so many lawsuits because we're negligent. And negligence is really when they're standing over there not paying attention, not doing their duties, and they're not supervising. That is negligence. Now, if they're supervising, it's not, and we have a better claim. But school districts, and if you were to, at some point, if you could, go back and look at over the last 10 years how much your school district has paid out for these kinds of little small things, or how much they paid on insurance, how much they paid hospital bills, you would be extremely surprised at how much we are willing to keep it out of court because we don't want to be, and so we settle out of court. So when you hear something, act on it immediately and document that you've acted on it. And don't just say, I called the central office and they didn't come out. Close down that monkey bar or whatever it is.
So here's some things that you might be liable for. You have individual liability, which is where you yourself as an employee exhibited reckless behavior that ended up, I guess I wonder would that go under what you were just talking about, Dr. Stone, by not paying attention, so that will fall under that. So you were reckless in that and students were injured. Vicarious liability is school districts can be held liable for teachers if they act their inappropriate behavior beyond their scope of duties. So, and this is one, foreseeability. So this can fall under if you knew that the monkey bars were not safe and you didn't say anything about it or didn't do anything about it. Did you foresee this injury? You can be held liable. Nuisance. If something is a nuisance on campus and it causes student harm, you can be liable. If you invite someone onto your campus, the school district is liable for anybody who's invited. Anybody who comes on there and they have a license to be on campus, you are still liable for their safety on your campus or, part of school. And the only one, trespassers. And I always wondered about this when kids use the playground on the weekend. Will the school be held liable? According to this chapter, it says that you will not be held liable for when they trespass. So I was wondering about that because they come use playgrounds all the time, and sometimes they get hurt while they're there. Liability.
Dante, can I add something there?
Yes.
Now, truly, they are trespassing. But if you've got a piece of equipment out there that you know is messed up and you still haven't done anything about it, they may have a case against you.
Wow.
They may, because you've allowed it to go on and on and on, because you already know people use it on the weekend. So it's not like you don't know it. So there's in your mind, there's a likelihood that someone's going to use that piece of equipment. So if it breaks, it'll be a little harder because and the other part to that too is the state may not consider them trespassing because in North Carolina, all public schools are public, and a law passed about 4 or 5 years ago that said we need to make our playgrounds available to the public, to everybody. And so they may not even be trespassing, but that you're still off the hook as long as you have made a good faith effort that you know nothing's bad on that playground. Good faith if you let your children play out there and nothing's wrong with it. But if you know something's wrong, you better fix it.
Okay, so at the school, at the bus stop. So the bus stop is an extension of the school, and you can give discipline. You can discipline students there, but you are not just held liable for things that happen at the bus stop. If you know of something, you must respond. You cannot ignore it if things are brought to your attention, but you are not held accountable for everything that happens at that bus stop. The use of technology, we have a big thing with cyberbullying and sexting and all that kind of cute stuff. You're not held liable for those things, but if it's brought to your attention, you don't do anything about it, you could be held liable. Parents coming to the school, you cannot deny them access to the school unless they are kind of do something that they are banned from the school. And when they do come on campus, you are to make sure that they are safe while they're there. If not, guess what? You can be held liable.
Right. And there's an exception to that, of course, is sexual predators or someone that has a record as a sexual, what do they call? Predator, I guess. So, so what would you do? Anyone? Shantae, I'm sorry. I told y'all I wouldn't talk, but
you can't help yourself. I see it. It's in you.
I love this Essex book. So what do you do when the dad is a sex offender? The dad's a sex offender. Him and mom are still together. And he comes to pick up Johnny, and he is on the list. Mom did not take him off the list. What do you do, Josh?
Can't come in.
You hear me, Josh?
Josh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, they can't come in. Right?
I'm asking.
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
I'm asking you.
If they're not on the, we always say if they're not on the emergency contact list or their names are not in any of our documentation. Oh, they are? Oh. Then.
Anyone else want to help, Josh? This is easy.
Can't come in.
No, he cannot come in. He's a sexual predator. State law.
Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
State law trumps that. There's only one occasion, Josh, that you can let him on campus. I'm going to give you a lifeline. There's only one occasion that you can let that sexual predator on your campus, and that is on election day. If your campus is open, he has a right to vote. But when he comes on your campus, you or your assistant principal have to stand there with him and walk with him to make sure he doesn't go anywhere near the other kids. So that's
but how would you know that?
That's what I was going to ask. How do you know that they're a sexual predator?
On election day.
How would you not know that? Your district is supposed to maintain, and the sheriff's departments are supposed to maintain with all principals in the district a listing of sexual predators.
I'm talking about on election day.
I'm sorry. Well, you just make an assumption that if he shows up on election day, he's there to vote.
Well, no, let's go back. It's not election day. In Kannapolis, because we don't want to even be involved in that situation, our schools that are polling sites, we just close them. So we don't mix children with potential sexual predators.
Oh, you're just helping Josh, of course.
No, I'm just saying that's our policy. That's what we do.
I understand, but not all districts are closed on election day.
That is true. That
And-
is
and
true.
Also, there is the law says that the sexual predator cannot be on a public campus. It doesn't have to say that your kids are there. So you would just, on an election day, you would just simply have to make the assumption that the person is there to vote and to monitor them to make sure. But you all know who the sexual predators in your community are, don't you?
No, I do not.
Yeah, we're not privy, or we do not have access to that information. It sounds like we need to, but we do have situations where the parent, we are aware that they do have a charge of some kind of sexual crime predator, but they can enter the building. They just have to be supervised by the principal or the SRO at all times.
Annie,
Is that-
you might want to check on this tomorrow, because I believe there is a state law that says sheriff's departments have to notify the principals of,
Yeah.
of
Okay.
people in your county, and in yours it would be a city, I would assume, the police chief. I think
Correct.
there's an obligation for them to notify you when someone goes on that sexual registry. But you can also go to, and I'll look for that website, but there's a website out there of all sexual registered people who are sexually registered, and you can go in and put in your demographics or your county, your area, and it will bring them all up for you. And that's what I would certainly encourage you to do. And I will try to find that. Does anybody know exactly what it is? I'm a little surprised, because I'll be honest with you, districts were told to do this.
Now, we've done that to where even at a principal's meeting, we've had each school go in, and you can pop in your neighborhood and you see all the little red dots come up, and it looks like ants, which is crazy, like living within a certain radius of a school. But Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not think we get a monthly or quarterly updated list of sexual predators.
I guess that's why I sound like an idiot, because in the 2 years that I've been at a principal at Forest Park, I've never received any information from the Kannapolis Police Department about sexual.
My husband is the principal at the high school, and he's just shared with me, no, he does not get any kind of list. So I'm thinking we need to get on that, correct?
Well, and unless it was something that we only did in Caldwell County, but I thought it was a state law that the sheriff's department has to notify you when someone is in your district. Maybe it's when they move into your district and they are a sexual predator. But I will do some research on that. But wow.
So everybody in our district in Fulton County has to sign in with their driver's license, and it is attached to their driver's license, so it pops up after when they sign in. And no matter if it's a parent or not, they cannot come even to a program. And they've been obviously to get mad and want to fight, but they cannot come in past the front office, and they have to be escorted out.
Right.
But I don't know.
We have that, yeah.
Yeah, but we don't. I don't know if we get a list. We find out when they sign in.
All right. I've got some homework tomorrow. I'm going to do some research to see on that, because at our superintendent's meeting, one of the ones about 4 years ago, that was unveiled to us as a new law. So, all right. And it may be somewhat different because you're in a city system, but doesn't the county talk to you guys in the city? Annie, does
Say that again. I apologize.
the department have to talk to you folks in the city?
Well, they come and they, I guess what I'm so shocked about is they're in our schools all the time. I mean, we have, an SRO at the middle and the high school and all the they travel among the elementary schools, but this topic is a topic of discussion. We just do not get, and we have where you have to check in with your license. We just do not have a list, which I think would be very helpful and beneficial.
Okay. And I could be wrong. Maybe it was just something that we were told to do in Caldwell County and the level of superintendents, the group that I was with. So let me do some checking. But if you don't have it, I would certainly put out some fillers to my law enforcement and say, can you put me on the list whenever a sexual predator moves into this area? That can I be on the list to receive notice? It is a public record. If you're a sexual predator, that list is public. And so it should be available to you. And as a principal or assistant principal, someone, I would certainly want to know when a sexual predator moves down the road in my school and may have children in my school, because it means that you're going to have to treat that parent somewhat differently or a lot differently. And I'm glad to hear that you don't have school on election day. That's a great way to get around it.
We do.
Do you?
Yes.
Caldwell County did too.
Torts fall into two categories when it deals with dealing with school personnel: intentional torts and unintentional torts. And an intentional tort is a deliberate act committed against another person that may or may not be accompanied by malice. If by action or speech these rights are violated, resulting in injury, a tort has been committed. And here are assault, battery, defamation, libel and slander, mental distress, false imprisonment, trespass on personal property. And I thought about false imprisonment. I'm like, false imprisonment when you hold a student illegally against their will for no reason. And so sometimes teachers can get caught, people, and they said teachers and principals, but I know sometimes people just want to do it to flex their muscle, but didn't understand that liable. You're just liable for doing that. Stop doing it. Defenses against defamation.
All right, pay good attention to this. Here's how you get out of it.
So if you're up, it says they give you three: privilege, good faith, and truth. Privilege: good school personnel statements are somewhat protected when executing their official duty. Somewhat. And I think too, like when you're doing like, and Dr. Stone, you can help me out with this. If you're talking about a student, maybe their IEP with people who have no business hearing about it. I mean, I don't know if people who are privileged to have this information, that's who you're supposed to talk about it with. Is that what that is talking about?
What this means this is your defense. Privilege is because you are protected by the state of North Carolina, and I'm sure in South Carolina, because you are principals and assistant principals, administrators have a special classification in state law. And that's where we get our privilege. People just can't go out and sue us because we do our job and you don't like what we do. As long as we're doing it like we're supposed to, or to the best of our ability and competency. So privilege means that we are a privileged position. And
Got
that's
you. Okay.
by state law because of our job. We're state employees, that's our privilege.
So if you're under state employees, you're operating in good faith?
Well, it means that you have a privilege, that you're doing your job to the best of your ability and you don't know you're not doing something right. So that's the privilege. The good faith piece is that by good faith, what it means is that I in good faith cannot say that I'm in good faith did not know that I was breaking the law. So it's a little bit nicer way other than to say ignorance of the law. It really is in good faith. I'm doing my job and I really did not know that I was doing this wrong. So it means that you're not malicious. You're not doing it on purpose. You're doing it in good faith because you think you're doing what's right. So that's a good argument to have too, in good faith.
And we hear that a lot. I'm doing that in good faith. But this one is true. If the courts recognize these statements as long as they're without malice and you believe them to be true.
Yep.
It says educators should be careful when making statements of opinions about students and or colleagues that might be damaging without having authority to make those statements. So
right. So the best example of this is if you have a teacher telling a mom that their child needs to be on Ritalin.
Yes.
That teacher is not a doctor. And that's not a medical opinion. And the assignment of Ritalin is a medical opinion, requires a medical opinion. Or if you have teachers, tell that, well, just be careful. Remember, we're teachers, we're not doctors, we have a scope. Our limited scope is their learning abilities and how they pick up knowledge.
So then you have unintentional torts. Oh, sorry. Trying to move my picture out the way. And that's a wrong perpetrated by someone who failed to exercise the proper degree of care in doing what is otherwise permissible. And negligence, the failure to exercise a reasonable standard of care that results in harm or injury to another person. Standard of care requires that the school personnel exercise the same degree of care that other professional educators holding similar positions will exercise under the same or similar conditions. Breach of duty. School personnel fail to meet the standard of care required in a given situation. Dr. Stone, would this fall under like the example we did at the play at recess?
It could be, or it would be that coach in the gym who's letting the kids go wild and throwing balls at each other while he's standing over in the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, we had this last week when they were doing in PE with the rackets. And the coach was over on the side while they were just swinging the rackets. And one student almost got hit. The principal almost got hit. She's like, I was scared for my life. I mean, I know she exaggerated a little bit, but still, you know, it was, you know. Proximate care
This is also bus duty, it's car duty, it's lunchroom duty. Anything that has the word duty to it, if you don't do your job, that's a breach of duty.
Okay. Proximate care is established if the evidence revealed that the employee's behavior played a direct role in the injury or incident. Injury. If no harm or injury is suffered by the student, there is no liability. There must be evidence showing that the injury resulted from acts committed by a school employee or their lack of care, failure to act. Defenses of negligence. Contributory negligence is the most common defense. When a teacher or administrator is charged and negligence is proven, there's no monetary award. Assumption of risk, most often seen with athletic teams. Schools are still expected to foresee possible injury. It must be established that the participants knew of the risk and voluntarily participated. So I don't know if that's why they signed the waivers, and I never played sports, but you know of the risk of playing basketball and you're choosing to play, still participating on the team. You know the risk. Comparative negligence, acts of those involved are compared in the degree of negligence. Jury will decide who, if anyone, is assessed damages. Immunity. Government is protected and can't be held liable. Teachers, administrators may or may not be covered because they are responsible for themselves. So maybe that's when you have your page or your insurance.
Well, and this is also, all of you as principals and administrators are covered by your school district's policies. So within the scope of your job. Now, Josh, if you go out on the weekend and you're not principal anymore and you get in a fight with Daryl and do something, that's a totally different thing. But as long as you are administering your duties, you are insured by the district.
Dr. Stone.
Oh, go ahead.
Dr. Stone, I just have one question in light of that. So if you are a principal and you have teachers that are on duty and a fight happens to break out while the teachers are on lunch duty, and you have a teacher who verbally says to the student, stop fighting, but does not want to get in between the two students to stop them from fighting, excuse me, is that teacher liable for not trying to position themselves in between the two students that are fighting?
Well, I think the courts could take it either way. I think if the teacher just stood there and said, stop, 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 then I think there is a case for negligence, because that teacher has, under her code of ethics, is responsible for the safety of students. Now, if that teacher, though, sends another child to go get the principal or has made some other act to try to alleviate it, maybe the teacher's pregnant, she doesn't want to get in the middle of it, those kinds of situations would come to light in the court case. Whether or not the teacher made some other effort to get help to stop the fight, or she calls some other students in, guys, would you kind of help me break this up? It all depends on what the teacher's doing. If she's just standing there saying, stop, stop, they may have some, I mean, I think the pregnancy piece would certainly go well for the teacher, but I think there could be some, yeah. Because in your duty as a teacher, you have an obligation for the safety of students. And that's an implication that you're going to do more than just say stop. But don't get in a fight if big boys are fighting and you're pregnant, but there are other things you can do to assist that student.
So not to, I guess, further the point, but what if a teacher decides to get in between the student and then the teacher becomes harmed as a result because the student has a razor blade, cuts the teacher? Now you have a bigger issue. So how would you handle that?
Well, I think at that point it becomes a legal issue for the court system to decide what to do with the child who cut the teacher. I think it also becomes an issue for you as an administrator about how two issues. One, how you deal with the student who are fighting, to deal with the situation itself, and then what kind of resources you put out there for that teacher. That teacher is going to, the district's probably going to have to come to provide a lot of resources. for that teacher, and they should. I don't think if the teacher knew there was a knife or something going into it, I would certainly hope they would use caution. But all you can do at that point is to assist with the legal investigation against that child and to assist the teacher in any kind of medical expenses and things like that to incur.
Shantae, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I also have a question. Lenore and I have talked a little bit this week about negligence and pregnancy, and so I'm just curious what your opinion is. So, as a principal and an assistant principal, we have a teacher who is in in our mental health and therapeutic classroom who is,
which is a self-contained.
Yes. Well, yes, but it's just for students who need that extra mental health support, but they can get quite aggressive. She just told us that she was pregnant. So from our perspective, I'm terrified, 4 weeks pregnant. Yeah, I'm terrified that she could sue us for negligence should something happen to her when she is physical with the student. So
well,
what,
you certainly are now in knowledge of the fact that she is pregnant. She has certainly made you knowledgeable of it. So that serves notice. So that does indeed raise the stakes for you, Josh. Is it yours, Lenore, or Josh's? But it definitely raises the stakes. And so I would certainly recommend that you sit with her and develop a plan. Because at some point, if those kids are pushing back and hitting and putting her health at risk, you're probably going to need to make a movement or a placement, give her an alternative placement.
She just shouldn't got pregnant.
I think we're going to talk about that in one of the other law cases, Lenore. We'll see how we respond to that one. But I think, Josh, I would sit down with her and have a conference and develop a plan with her, realizing so that way she owns part of it. And
right.
Because right now it is in your ballpark because you've been notified.
Mm-hmm.
Until you develop that plan, you own it completely.
Well, here's the other part about that. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not joking. I'm being.
Oh, yeah.
Just because she's pregnant doesn't mean that she's fragile. Right?
I can't answer that, never being pregnant, but I would imagine, and perhaps someone could Lenore, why do you ask such hard questions? I don't know, but I would imagine that a hit to the stomach at some point, or a push to the stomach at some point, may have some adverse effect on the development of a baby. Now, I don't know, but I would imagine that your stomach has to be protected. And so if you've got some mean little kid in there who throws chairs every time he has a mental breakdown, and that chair hits you in the stomach, I tell you what, as a principal, I'd be extremely cautious. I certainly would.
Okay.
I don't know the mechanics of pregnancy. I've watched a couple, but I don't know the mechanics of it. But I think there comes a time when your stomach has to be completely protected, and not to mention the mental stress of children throwing things in the classroom. That's just not a very good setting for a pregnant lady, to be honest.
Wow.
So would you suggest an alternative setting for the following year? Because you're right, this classroom that he's speaking of, it's a daily occurrence of either having to restrain or the kids lashing out, but not that it's appropriate behavior, but it is for that setting. That's why they're in there. So because this is a real situation, what do we need to do for next year?
Well, she's, 4 weeks?
Yes, 4 weeks.
Okay, so the pregnancy will occur next
November 26th.
all this stuff. I would say that goes back to that plan you are developing. Get someone from HR who probably understands the rights of pregnant women a lot better than I do. But I would, even at the point that she's notified you and Josh and Lenore, I would go in and make a plan with her, because it's going to be a lot easier for you in a court case, should something happen, for you to say, well, I sat down with her and this is the plan we developed, and no, she did not come to me when she felt like she needed to. So I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry it happened, but I had no knowledge of this because it's not following our plan. Put it back on her. It is not for you to hold it. So, and next year, Annie, I would certainly say I mean, what would she be, 7 months pregnant or 6 months or something? She'll be showing. I would certainly talk to my HR office. I would be very uncomfortable as a district taking that liability.
Well, I think that's the direction that you guys are thinking, right? Maybe even put her in a different setting for next year, and which she's agreeing to, correct?
Yeah, honestly just worried about the next 11 weeks.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Develop a plan, Josh.
Okay.
Make her own it.
Sorry, Shantae. Didn't mean to take your time.
Oh, I'm so cool with it.
Dr. Stone, I had a burning question from Shamika's example. I was holding that burning question.
Okay.
Do you think it would be beneficial for a superintendent to invest resources in providing CPI training for a number of staff at each school so that they have the ability to restrain and break up fights properly? Do you think that would be a waste of financial resources or something that would be more beneficial in protecting the teachers?
You mean a person whose main job is to basically break up fights?
Well, their main job, teachers would be their main job, teaching, but they would have the training to break up fights in a proper way. So we call it therapeutic intervention. So
I think that would be money well spent. And I also believe that it would be beneficial for you as a principal to have those people strategically placed throughout your building. And to have some sort of plan where if there's a big old fight in the cafeteria, that one of those teachers obviously is very close to the cafeteria. Doesn't have to be a male, but if it's the big old male coach, maybe that's a good thing. But someone strategically placed, and then for there to be some kind of system where that person can be immediately called to the. I think that shows a lot of planning by the district, a lot of planning by the principal that's going to serve you extremely well should you ever face it in court. So I would say even if the district doesn't pay for it, it might be worth investing in the school if you had some money, or if your PTA had some money, to have at least some 2 or 3 strategically located people. See, I think the state is wasting its time and resources on investigating whether or not we should pay teachers extra money to carry a gun. That would be more important if they gave them extra money to have the training that you're talking about. I mean, that's where we're going to be using it. So I'd say, Daryl, if you had some money, you may want to invest in 1 or 2 of those people. But yeah, it should be a priority, because I do think I think we probably have less fights in schools now than we ever have. I think that's what the statistics show. But you need to protect your staff too. You're not just protecting your students, you're also protecting your staff. So I would say it'd be money well spent. And it may be something that just needs to filter up to the superintendent level to say, is there a grant or something that we can do to help do some training?
Hey, Daryl and others, those of you who work in CMS, do you know anything about your district or people having making your employees sign waivers that if they are CPI certified or trained, that they won't sue? Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard anything about it.
No, I haven't heard
Okay.
anything.
No.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Dr. Stone, is there a law that discusses kind of what you said, that it's the teacher's responsibility to break up a fight? I just find it really hard to believe that unless I'm pregnant, my life isn't valued.
Well, I think your life is valued, but I think if you'll look under the ethics, and I can try to find it, but the ethics for teachers, and it is basically an understanding that you're going to provide a safe environment and you're going to do everything within your power to do that. Does it spell out that you're going to get between 2 big old boys in high school? No. But within the context of your code of ethics and your professional standards, there is an understanding that you're going to do whatever you can to make sure that that child is safe. But it's not going to spell it out and say you need to get between children. But I think a court case, and a court case has been made when teachers just stand back and not intervene or do anything. Now, Courtney, if you are, I've seen 5-foot teachers go in and command the respect that kids just immediately stop. And what I've observed when I was a principal in a high school was that a lot of times a commanding teacher can do it just simply verbally by command, and others will help that person. But to your point, I think a case could be made to a law court that you have signed a code of ethics and professional standards that you are going to protect children. And if you're standing there and just saying quit, you guys quit, and doing nothing else, I think you are probably in violation of your standards of codes of conduct and ethics. Now, if you're doing everything you can, screaming, guys, stop. Hey, Steve, you run to the office and get the assistant principal. Sally, you go down here and get, or Steve, come over here and help. I think that is appropriate. To throw yourself between two people fighting with knives or guns or things like that, I think is not expected of you, but to do something to protect those kids. So Courtney, it may not necessarily be jumping in between them, but you've got to be doing something to protect them. Whether it's going to get more help, trying to alert someone or something, you've got to be doing something. Yeah, I do believe that. And it's in your code of ethics and professional standards. And it's all, and it doesn't spell it out. It just says safety of children. But we don't want you to get hurt, Courtney. I would hope that you would do something, you know, get some of those guys that, you know, in the hall that helps and things like that. People, yeah. Did that answer it, Courtney? All right.
Thank you.
Do you want me to bring up the code? I can try to find the code of ethics and code of conduct for teachers, but professional standards. But it's all related. It's not going to spell it out. It's all related to safety. All right, Shantae, I've been holding you up. I am sorry.
You might as well finish my presentation. Go ahead.
I know. I want to hear you.
You just want me to say something. Okay, here I am. Standard of care for teachers of physical education, sports, science, and vocational labs are higher because of the nature, that's supposed to be nature of the activities. This court case where the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled that the school district did not take the steps to protect the student while using a welding torch because they did not comply to safety regulations. That's why it's very important that teachers are visible, paying attention, going over the safety regulations, and making sure that students are following, because you are liable. Duties of supervision. I found this one to be kind of interesting about what schools are required to do for students before, during, after school, and during field trips. So before school, parents drop kids off all the time. But schools, if you're not going to have anybody there in writing, you must say in writing that you are not offering any adult supervision before school. Administrators are responsible for ensuring that their campus is safe. I know, so I guess some parents drop their kids off and they leave them sitting there. So I guess you can't have any unsafe things or nuisance out there when they're sitting out there alone. So I just, and if you want to look up a case, look up Titus versus Lindbergh. So that was just like, you know, school starts at 7:15, so they can just come to the school anytime they want to. And you must have something to write saying that no adult supervision is going to be given, or you can be liable. So during school, you assume the responsibility to provide reasonable supervision when assigned students. Teachers must caution students if they observe other students engaged in dangerous or harmful activities. After schools, it says courts generally don't expect schools to provide after school supervision unless students are participating in extracurricular activities. Parents should be informed if no supervision will be provided after the normal school day ends. During field trips, teachers have a legal duty to supervise and ensure student safety. And you might say, duh, but a lot of people sometimes send groups of students off by themselves and to supervise themselves because they're age appropriate, but you're still liable for anything that happens to them. And transportation by district-owned or commercial lines, you cannot transport them on a field trip in your personal vehicles. Liability involving civil statutes. Wood versus Strickland case dealt with a student expulsion. Briefly addressed the issue of liability of school board members in relation to civil rights violation of students. Courts held that school board members may be held accountable for damages when they violate the constitutional rights of students. The filing charges under the Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act of 1871 prohibits denial of constitutional and statutory rights of public officials, allows students to seek monetary damages from state officials or acts that violated their constitutional rights. Liability insurance, they come to the school all the time to offer us additional insurance, but Dr. Stone said we're covered under the school district's policies as well. It's important that educators have liability insurance for protection against potential liability charges.
Only if you're not deliberately negligent. The district will defend you if you're doing your job.
Okay. Educational malpractice, defined as any unprofessional conduct or lack of sufficient skill in the performance of professional duties. Professionalism in education, development of teaching standards that involve the establishment of quality indicators and standards of practice that would drive the instructional program. No Child Left Behind, focused on accountability. They gave teachers some accountability indicators that they could use to define and accountability. So I don't know what do we have now instead for accountability. Anybody know? Do we have any accountability measures now that can hold teachers accountable?
Isn't it the Every Child Succeeds Act?
Is that what replaced No Child Left Behind? Okay. So here are some landmark cases. Peter W. versus San Francisco Unified School District involved a student who graduated reading at 5th grade level. Parents were told that he was reading near or at grade level, so they sued on the grounds of a misleading and bad education. The courts could not establish standard of care for classroom instruction. The courts did not rule in the parents' favor for this one. Hoffman versus the Board of Education case involved a 6-year-old who was in the wrong placement for special services. Student was originally awarded $500,000 in damages. After appeals, the school board won. Wisconsin Supreme Court held that a school district was not liable for educational malpractice when a guidance counselor advice regarding NCAA eligibility resulted in a student scholarship loss. So they sued for that. I read up on that, and that was interesting to me. The counselor gave some advice. The student didn't get in, and the parents sued. So did not win. So my key takeaways from this basically is you need to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, or you could be liable. And sometimes you will be held liable individually, and you will not be supported by the district if you are held liable. So you need to make sure you have some liability insurance on your own, because you will be held liable or you have to file bankruptcy. That's our presentation.
And thank you for that uplifting message, Shante.
Get you some insurance. Thank you, everyone.
Shante, is your husband an insurance salesman?
He's whatever he can want to be when I find one.
Oh, well, yeah, well, get an insurance guy. All right, we have Courtney will be up next. I propose that we take like a 2 or 3 minute break to stretch, do other things. Thank you, Shante. Thank you, Lindsay. So if you'll quit sharing, Shante, Courtney can come on board, and we will take like a 2 minute break and come back.
think it's been 2 minutes. Oh, he ain't back yet. I'm finna change clothes though.
Oh, you all could hear me shredding. Okay. All right. So, Courtney, you're up.
Okay, I had chapter 7. It was on liability and student records. I wanted to open it up with one of the case studies that was in the back. It says, Jamie Price, a teacher in an affluent high school in the Mid-South, reviewed the educational records of one of her students and discovered some very confidential information that she shared with another teacher during their break in the teacher's lounge. Because the other teacher had not personally accessed the information, she felt comfortable sharing this information with another colleague. So I have 4 questions that I wanted us to discuss. The first one is there a risk in sharing confidential student information with a colleague? Why or why not? Anybody?
Of course, there's a risk because those people could go out and tell others who shouldn't have access or privilege to that information.
And then I also think that if that person, the first person that you told it to, didn't have a direct relationship or didn't need to know that information, then that's a risk as well. It shouldn't be shared with someone unless they're directly affected by or working with that student.
Okay, anyone else?
I think it's a risk because you're evaluated on the rubric for maintaining positive employee relationships. And by revealing that information, you're compromising those relationships.
Okay, so the second question is, what legal options might the student exercise in this situation? And under what circumstances might these options be pursued?
So students have a lot of privacy rights, I think. So, I mean, his parents could sue. I think that's a legal option.
Of course.
Anyone else wants to respond? I'm purposely not responding because I'm going to talk about it.
Well, I think it depends on what was shared, but I mean, it could be, defamation of character. I agree with Lenore. I mean, sue on just divulging private confidentiality. I mean, that goes back to the standards that teachers are held to. Just over and beyond, we are not supposed to talk.
Well, Annie, can you and I stand in the hall and talk about my behavior in the classroom, Steve's behavior in my classroom, and behavior in your classroom?
I would say not in. It does happen in a hallway setting, but I think if you are, and I hate to use the word target, but targeting a specific student, and it's not productive conversation of looking for strategies how to better, but just it's no different than having that conversation in the grocery store.
Okay.
Right. So I do think you're liable for that, but it's the context of the conversation, because there are times when you do talk with colleagues and PLCs about student behaviors. Heck, MTSS, you're discussing those students and be academic or behavior, but I think it's the context, the setting, and what your purpose is.
All right. Question number 3. What is Price's defense if challenges about her divulging this information arise? What can she say in defense? Or what could she say?
Well, hopefully she would say something like, well, the teacher's lounge was the first opportunity that I had to talk with my teammate. We co-teach this child together. It was pertinent that she know about this confidential information from his past because we were wondering how it affected his behavior. We were trying to problem solve. Hopefully she would say something like that. It would all be lies probably, but.
Yeah, she would take the good faith or the goodwill approach as described in Shantae's presentation. Like, I didn't mean any harm in what I was saying or doing. I was trying to seek additional support.
Hopefully she would add to that she received the permission from the student's parent or guardian to share that information, hopefully, which in this case she probably did not.
Okay. And if this was actually taken to court and the student, moved further legally, how do you think the court would rule in this instance?
I think it would come back on the intent and whose burden is it to, I think it would be her burden to respond or to prove, it was her burden of proof to do that. So I could see where if she didn't have a strong defense and it wasn't legit in context and purpose, that they would rule against her. Again, this seems such a simple situation that happens all the time in schools. So I think it's a very, very gray area. But I mean, good golly, this happens all the time, daily.
I agree. So this scenario kind of goes into what this chapter was about. It talked about student records and confidentiality. And I pulled this particular case study because, like you said, it happens every day. I'm sure it happened a million times, if not more, today. But you're gonna find out whether or not your answers were correct or wrong. So the purpose of student records is just to maintain an educational record to help develop the best program for each student in a school. And the book also further talked about to maintain confidentiality for that student as well as that parent, because students have rights. They are people, they are human beings, although they may not be of age, and their rights do change when they turn 18, but students do have rights for their personal and confidential information to not be shared unless it is necessary. And that is the purpose the reason why we have student records. So FERPA, someone was saying something about, I think they're laws or something. So FERPA is the law that covers that. It's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It was established in 1974. Of course, it has been amended in some cases, but it is a federal law that protects the confidentiality of students' educational records to ensure that students' personal information is not released without parental consent. Once a student turns 18 or they attend a post-secondary institution, those rights, the parental rights, transfer to that student, and so they now have the same rights as a parent of a child that's not 18. This was in the chapter, and I just wanted to pull it out. There were a lot of tables in this chapter that I thought were good, but I just wanted to pull this one out. It tells us exactly what educational records include and what they do not include. I know everybody in here has seen an educational record, so this is not new information, but it will have records, files, documents pertaining to the child's educational past history. Other materials, it may contain information directly related to a student or an educational agency, institution, or person acting for that agency or institution. What it does not include instructional resources, supervisory records maintained by law enforcement, records on an 18-year-old student attending a post-secondary. So once they're 18, it won't include any of those records, but really just kind of includes things that are based upon their education, services they may have received in the past, and important medical information So parents have rights, and one thing that stuck out to me, of course, I'm not going to read all of these, but one thing that stuck out to me is that on an annual basis, it is the school and the district's responsibility to make sure that parents are given that opportunity to view their child's educational records. It mentioned that you can remind them or announce this through PTA meetings, newsletters, various ways that you can announce this, but on an annual basis, this should be something that parents are notified because they should be able to review their child's educational record on an annual basis. And if there is something that the parent does not agree with that is in their educational record, they can dispute it, and something has to be done about it within 10 days. So they have the right to inspect, review, seek amendments. Notice, they can provide a notice if they want something changed. So parents do have these rights, and they should. I'm just interested to hear from the APs and principals, how often do parents kind of request to see their child's educational or student records? Is this something that happens daily, or when something bad occurs, or?
I think most of the time it happens when there's a custody dispute, or a parent coming back in the picture that hasn't been, or when the parents hate each other. That's typically when we see the most requests for records.
Okay. So an NPRM is a notice of proposed rulemaking. Basically, it's kind of like the amendments to the rulemaking and implementation of FERPA laws based upon different instances that have taken place where some parts of it may have not been clear. So these are three things that you can find in the NPRM. Stronger enforcement. So they're basically stating that there's a need for stronger, more specific, and clearer enforcement authority over all persons that are either they have the student records on their person, they're responsible for, they maintain them, they collect the information that goes inside of them. The second thing is ensuring the safety of students. Schools must have the flexibility to implement directory policies. One thing, student directory information like their name, their address, their phone number, date of birth, and attendance, that is information that is not considered confidential. Now, if you're releasing that information, the parents do have to be aware of that, and they should have the opportunity to tell you, no, I would not like this disclosed. But that is not, that basic demographic, where do you live, all of that is not considered confidential. The third was ensuring the effectiveness of publicly funded programs. State and local communities must have the ability to share student data, which would be their records, in order to evaluate the effectiveness of their educational programs, to see if they're working, what things need to be changed. So these are three things that will be found in the NPRM. So student records in the chapter kind of had a few headings. Rights of non-custodial parents. So schools and districts should provide a policy to guide these types of situations. So they kind of put that burden and responsibility on the district and the school. So in those instances that Josh was talking about, where parents coming back in the picture, or there's a divorce and the mom doesn't want the dad to have rights to the educational records or be able to see the child, the district and the school should have a policy for those types of situations. Rights of eligible students that are 18 years of age and older have the same rights as their parents. So that means if you have a senior or 9th grader, 10th grader that are requesting to see their educational records, they have that right. And if they do not agree with something in there, they have the right to dispute it, and they have all the same rights as their parents. Rights of school personnel, teachers, counselors, and administrators do have the right to view student records, but only if it is directly affecting them. If they're working with that student, or there is an area of concern with that student, and there should be some type of record keeping as to who views the record and what the reason was for that teacher, counselor, administrator viewing those records. The book stated that in there very clearly that they shouldn't just be going in and have access, but there should be a log. This person viewed the record for this reason. Because like the scenario we gave at the beginning, if that teacher that confidential information was shared with doesn't teach this student, doesn't know this student, doesn't work with this student, is not impacted by this student, they should not know that information just because they are a teacher. That does not give them the right to know, that child's confidential information. Digitizing student records, of course, we're moving in the technology age, so a lot of districts and schools are no paper, all electronic. So it is okay under FERPA laws to house student records electronically as long as the information is in a safe place, it's properly collected, and it is maintained. The safety of that is maintained. Confidentiality with school counselors. So school counselors are a little bit different when it comes to FERPA because personal files that are housed or kept only by that counselor is not considered a FERPA file, if I could call it that. So if a child goes to a school counselor and shares personal information and that counselor keeps the records to themselves and they're the sole person using those personal files, the counselor does not necessarily have to share that information with anyone, not even the parent. But if there is some type of public legal action that takes place, of course, confidentiality is then thrown out the window and those records can be taken. So some popular or well-known FERPA cases is the first one. There's a bunch of them. I just chose two. Owasso School District versus Falvo. This was from February 19, 2002. This had to do with the peer grading. So it was, resolved that peer grading does not violate FERPA. And I thought this was an interesting one because I had a conversation with a coworker about a week ago about peer grading. But it says student papers are not maintained within the meaning of FERPA when students correct them or call out grades. Maintain suggests that FERPA records were kept in files or cabinets in a records room at the school. The court stated further that FERPA should not be construed to prohibit techniques currently used by teachers. If homework or classwork were considered educational records, a substantial burden will be placed on teachers across the country. Simply stated, an assignment is not considered an educational record as soon as it is graded by another student. But I know that there are a lot of district policies or school policies where teachers are not allowed to use this method of grading. Has anyone had an issue with this in your district or your school? No? Okay, the next case is Doe versus Gonzaga, and this was June 20th, 2002. In the Gonzaga case, a student brought litigation against the university for disclosing personally identifiable information without his consent in violation of FERPA, and the Supreme Court ruled that students and parents may not sue for damages to enforce provisions of FERPA, so that protected that post-secondary institution from that. Again, there were many cases, but these were just two that I chose. And then the last piece, it went and talked about defamation, but Shantae talked about that a little bit. And this is just an administrative guide about liability in student records. So as administrator, these are things that we need to make sure that we do and fall in line when it comes down to FERPA. And that's it.
All right. Any questions for Courtney? All right, Annie, you're up. Oh, while Annie's coming up, let me share something before I let Annie share. I'm still trying to find, can all of you see this 14-208-19? This is a general statute passed 2008. Do you all, I'm assuming that you as principals, you are getting this. You have done this, right? I'm still trying to find the sheriff's part, and I'll still try to keep finding that, but I ran across this. So it just requires that you go in and register so you can get email notifications. So I'm assuming that's something that you've done at your school. If you are a principal or an assistant principal, you need to check to make sure that your school has done this because it is a requirement of the law. So anyway, just go back and check. Annie, we're all yours.
I don't think I can share. It says I can't screen share.
Oh, yeah, right. I guess so.
Okay. Let me try one. Here we go. Hang on. Here we go. And let me go to presentation. I think. Okay, so I had I apologize, let me go back. Chapter 8, Teacher Freedoms. And it started out just laying the foundation that teachers, I think we've talked in depth about that we are certainly held to a much higher ethical, moral standards, our professional conduct. But with all of that, they do emphasize that teachers do have constitutional freedoms that must be respected by school authorities. So with that, this chapter lands on just what teacher freedoms we do have. But the two key things that just to keep in mind as we go through this chapter is the procedural and the substantive considerations, where these two things, if you are looking at any kind of dismissal route or anything that will take away some of the freedoms that a teacher has, these two things need to be in place. Starting out with due process, your 14th Amendment, like the state may not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And also, you must have a valid objective when you intend to deprive a teacher of life, liberty, or property, and the means used must be reasonably calculated for the objective. In
So,
simple
Annie,
terms, yes.
Is your job your property?
Is my job my property?
Your job a property right.
Say that again. I don't think I quite heard the first. Are you asking, is it a property right?
Is your job a property right?
It is within my contract, my responsibilities, but it's not. I mean, I have to stay within that lane of what's expected of that property right, correct?
Your job, your contract for all of you, if you have a contract, that's a property right.
But I guess what they're saying is that it can't be arbitrary, capricious, personal, or political gain as a reason to restrict that right.
Right. That's true. But what I'm helping elaborate with, I think, is
okay.
Person of life, liberty, or property. Your job is a property right. So
Gotcha.
You can't take your job without due process.
Gotcha. I think what I had always heard, procedural due process, but not just emphasizing that there had to be a clear objective and reasonably calculated. Basically, you got to have your ducks in a row if you are going to go down that route.
Absolutely.
Freedom of expression, by virtue of the First Amendment to the Constitution, teachers are afforded rights of freedom of expression. However, by teachers is limited to the requirement that such speech does not create material disruption in the educational interest of the school district. And again, the burden of proof justifying such restriction rests within school authorities. And under freedom of expression, there were two categories, one being speech outside the school environment. Freedom of speech outside the school environment is well established. However, when exercising such speech, a teacher should preface the comments by indicating that he or she is speaking as a private citizen rather than reflecting the school district as an employee. And this is a famous case that I think we've talked about in this class. I know we have in others, Pickering versus the Board of Education, where it was a teacher who had written a letter to the editor just voicing complaints about, I believe it was a school board proposal for a tax increase. The school board felt that it was detrimental to efficient operations and administration of schools. But the U.S. Supreme Court, because it did go that far, basically said he still had his right to speak on issues of public importance. There was some accusations that there were false statements in his editorial, but they could not prove that they were knowingly or recklessly made by the teacher. So in essence, Pickering was upheld, and he was able to keep his job. The other one, they talked about academic freedom, basically what's going on in the classroom when you're teaching. It's a very limited concept in public schools. You don't have the latitude to deviate from the school's mission, vision, or behavioral expectations. You're held to the requirement that content introduced into the discussion be related to and consistent with the teacher's certification and teaching assignment. I have a feeling this is where some folks may tread lightly or they're on thin ice with this. Two pretty famous cases, and one I think we discussed a couple weeks ago, but the Fowler versus Board of Education, Lincoln County. This was, we talked about the Pink Floyd, The Wall movie that was shown, where it was a teacher on the last day of school wanting to finish grading and popped in this movie, having not viewed it, previewed it, had no connection to the content. A student did highlight the fact that there was some inappropriate content, or I think at least one scene, and it was just suggested, when we get to that scene, hold something up. That did not land very well, and I think when she sued and tried to say it was her academic freedom and First Amendment rights, it was not upheld because it did not, for one, it was inappropriate content, but it certainly was not related to and consistent with the standards, and she had intent going into it that she knew that it was not aligned with her teaching standards.
And wasn't she a math teacher?
I can't recall the content. I just know it was the last day of school, which I think this is notice for all administrators that a lot of movies are popped in on the last week of school as a means to get things done, and just, whether it's condoned or not, just ensuring that those movies are appropriate and that you can stand by them, that there's a good content and academic reason for showing those movies. I hope I'm pronouncing this correct. Loeffleman versus the Board of Education. This one, she was an elementary teacher, and I believe it was a social studies lesson, and somehow interracial marriages came up. And she used the classroom for her personal platform and basically talked about she did not agree with interracial marriages, went as far as to say that those parents should be fixed and not have children. So as you can imagine, she did not have her job very long, just because it was a personal opinion. Whether you agree with it or not, that was beside the point, but she brought that into the classroom.
Amy, did that happen a long time ago?
Oh, shoot. Somebody can Google that really quick. I think within the last 20 years, so not, you would think, I know, I do think would a response, because we even talked about it at the class, would the Pink Floyd, The Wall movie have a different response in 2019 than it would 20 years ago? But good question.
Yeah, and if you look in the back of your ethics book, which I can't find mine, but in the back it's got all the court cases. So
okay, yeah, somebody look at that and find it. The other one, which is, I think, as we move into the digital age, regarding teacher freedoms, is teachers' use of Facebook and social media. And I know in Kannapolis City we deal with this one quite a bit. Setting those guidelines of what's appropriate, what's not. I'm sure as most teacher or school districts do, at our new teacher induction, we have our school lawyer come in and talk to beginning teachers about this. Basically, this whole chapter, they come and talk with them about dress, classroom, conduct, but this is a biggie, it's social media. And the two takeaways that I had from that section was basically teachers are role models for their students and should have regard for that. But if it's unacceptable in the classroom, it's probably unacceptable on social media sites. Also, there were several, too many to list, but a lot of states and districts, some of the evolving policies are what they're stating or requiring is that all electronic contacts with students should be made through the district's digital accounts and telephone systems.
That's
Just
a
kind
wise,
of
that's fine.
on the teacher. I'm sorry?
That's very wise,
Yes.
because if a teacher has a Facebook page, private Facebook page, and they're sharing with students, it opens it up to all sorts of things. And you as a district, it wouldn't take, I would almost guarantee you, any one of us, 10 of us or 9 of us, if you go back and look at our Facebook pages, if we have one, there may be a picture or there that we're not quite proud of when we maybe had that beer in our hand or something. Be real careful in all of your Facebook postings. And if you certainly are interacting with your community or you've made friends with them, I would highly discourage it. In Caldwell County, we would not hire people because we had to require them before they were ever hired. Now, it's a little harder when it's hard to get teachers, but you can actually require them to open up their social media sites before you even hire them.
I can say at the district level, I just hired somebody in the office the other day, and that's the first thing we do is we look at their social media page. Now, it's not a non-negotiable, but if we see red flags and if it's between that candidate and somebody else, you don't get the job. One of the things we do have trouble with at the secondary level with coaches and like personal cell phone use and giving out cell numbers. And a lot of times it's legit, it's a coach or a teacher corresponding with a student, but we really tried to refrain from doing that or send the message, please don't do that, because out of context, if a student gets angry or just it could fall in the wrong hands. But we find that more at the secondary level than the elementary. And
when you become superintendent of your district, I would put something out there where you're technology people and you have a program and make it a requirement that any communications with kids goes through the district thing, because that way you can control it and you can monitor it. And if they go outside of that district, you've got coordination. So when you become superintendent, invest in that very quickly.
The next topic was just freedom of association, like being a part of something that may not align with the school value. A big takeaway is a teacher serves as a role model for his or her students, exerting a subtle but important influence over the perceptions and values. So the 4 big areas, whether you are a member of a subversive organization, what political rights, your right to hold office, participation in political campaigns, you have the right to do that. However, it has to be solely independent of your job or the district you work with, and it also cannot be illegal. But if it is something that may not be a popular opinion, as long as it does not conflict or negate any thing within your workforce, from what I'm understanding, it seems to be legit. It did talk about how just in the last 20 to 25 years, the trend does seem to be toward greater political freedoms, as long as the teacher, again, exhibits professional behavior, does not neglect her professional duties. But I just think with the openness, whether it's the Pandora's box that's open, it's hard to, there are so many outlets for communication. And I think that coincides with why, I mean, if not, we would be having lawsuits every time we turned around. So there does seem to be just a little more openness or allowances. Dress and grooming. This one is, the court will not support if a district is trying to restrict the dress and grooming of a teacher if it's unrelated to their policies. If it's challenged, the district must demonstrate that the policies are related to a legitimate educational purpose and not designed to place undue or unnecessary restrictions on a teacher's dress. I think we've said this 1,000 times, the burden of proof rests with the school district if you're going that route.
So Annie, can I keep you or a Muslim woman from wearing the hair habib or whatever?
The hijab?
Hijab.
No, we actually have some students that wear them. If it is, because I'm going to get to freedom of religion next.
Go ahead.
think that if it goes along with your religion, but we don't have any adult teachers that are in that, but we do have, well, I think we have 5 or 6 students across the elementaries and at the high school that wear their dress or their headwear. So religious discrimination in public schools. This goes under the Civil Rights Act, Title VII. It protects against any forms of religious discrimination regarding employment. Employers, including school boards, are to make reasonable, I thought that was a key word, accommodations to the employee's religion unless the employer can demonstrate the inability to do so based on undue hardship. Very gray area. I'd like to hear, Dr. Stone, if you have any cases that would highlight that, but school officials must respect and where possible make allowances for a teacher's religious observances if such observances do not create a disruption to the educational process. It talked, and I apologize, I can't quite find it, but a teacher that may need to take some days off that coincides with religious holidays, and if they have the time and it does not, it's certainly going to be a disruption where a substitute's having to go into the school day, but if they can make those allowances, they do have the right to take those days if it is observing a religious ideology.
I think of those as, is it a manageable disruption? And if
Correct.
It's a manageable disruption or something that happens, other people, other people have days that they take off, maybe inconvenient, but if it's manageable. But if they want to take off every Friday for a religious holiday, I think that's undue burden.
Yeah. And that's where I thought the key word was reasonable. If we can, like you had said earlier, come up with a plan. We know up front that these are the accommodations that's being asked of the school. But just, I'm going to willy-nilly take off every Monday and Friday because it's my religious observance. That probably would be a disruption.
And as a principal, you can require proof of it. You can require evidence that this is a religious holiday.
So I just wanted to hear from you guys because I've thought about politics with social media and just, being able to, we've got so many platforms where we can espouse our personal views. So if you had any thoughts with the state of education and politics today, have you observed any areas of teacher freedoms that have become distractions in your district? Whether it may not have, evolved into a lawsuit or gone even to the district level, but anything that you see as bubbling that's getting very close to a distraction.
Have any of your teachers worn a Magna hat to work yet? What would you do with that?
A what?
MAGA, Make America Great Again.
Well, go ahead. I want to hear from them.
I don't think hats are in our dress code. So
yeah, but if
or like a T-shirt, because I know that we the day after the election, we had some high school students, it was a distraction. It was students. It wasn't teachers. So I probably need to compartmentalize that. But.
Okay, but Josh, to your point, I'm your teacher and I'm coming in the door and I've got my hat on and I'll take it off when I get in the building and when I do my job. But I'm clearly getting out of my car with that MAGA hat on again, big bright red hat, walking past those African-American teachers, those Latin American teachers, those teachers who have good common sense. How does that differ? I mean, what do you do? Because if I take my hat off and I'm in the building, true, I have complied with your no hat policy, although I bet you let me wear it on Fridays sometime if I pay $1. What would you do if somebody walked in with the Make America Great Again hat? That's probably the next thing you're going to get at your doorstep in 2020.
Yeah, I'm trying. I had that chapter 6 on. I don't think there's nothing. I don't think, as long as they take it off when they come in the building and they're on the time of as a government employee, they can't.
All right, suppose that I'm walking in and there's a group of you who's standing there ready to fight me, teachers, because I've got on this hat.
Or it causes an argument, or you've got another group who's wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts or something like that.
That's a disruption. I think you'd be within your rights to say, Steve, you cannot wear that anywhere on the campus. You can't wear it in your car. I mean, you cannot be seen on this campus, period, with that hat on, because it would be a disruption. Just where a Black Lives Matter hat may be a disruption. I think you need to tread lightly. But the key thing is, does it cause a disruption? And the way politics is now, as Annie says, it doesn't take much to find something that's going to make somebody else. I mean, we're all gotten so sensitive to things that it's going to quickly, it'll quickly go south. I think there are probably more reasons now to restrict stuff, because I think there is more cases where it can prove to be a disruption. All right, Annie, I don't want to slow you down. I shouldn't be talking. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I'm at my takeaways. Teachers are viewed as role models and held to higher standards, but both teachers and employers do have rights. But I think most importantly, as a district leader, it is my responsibility to know those rights and be prepared to demonstrate burden of proof if it falls on the district. If we are trying to, tell someone that they can't wear their MAGA hat or their Black Lives Matter t-shirt, I need to know what I'm getting into and have my ducks in a row before I even venture into territory. And that's all I have.
All right.
Questions?
Any questions for Annie? All right, Daryl, you up? You guys look so happy. Courtney's asleep.
We're so tired, but we're hanging on. You keep us entertained, Dr. Stone.
Well, I'm giving you that. Title IX, one of my favorites, Daryl. This whole book is my favorite. I love this book.
You say that to all the chapters. What's wrong with you?
All right, so I'm gonna jump right in. I had Exodus chapter 9, discrimination in employment. The book kind of starts off with a basis of past practice. So basically talks about a significant number of public school personnel practices have been challenged based on discrimination. And those concentration areas of discrimination have been in race, gender, age, and religion. Many school districts responded to these challenges by noting that many of their current practices were based on custom rather than a deliberate intent to discriminate. So their intent was not to discriminate, but it was based off custom. The book then goes into talking about the 4 aspects of due process of law. Annie did mention 2 of those, procedural due process and substantive due process. For the latter one, laws involving this are held to higher standards than those addressing less penalties. It also talked about the vagueness test. This protects those who allege discrimination from arbitrary or capricious acts by the employer. Laws and policies are vague if a person of common intelligence has to guess the meaning. So we want to make sure these laws and policies are easy to interpret, so there's no vagueness.
And that's generally defined as an 8th grade education.
10-4. An example of this, cases involving the termination of tenured teachers or administrators. Prior notice and an opportunity to respond to the charges must be granted to those teachers and administrators in such cases. Also, the presumption test. This is basically around presuming innocence until proven guilty. And we see this embedded in several provisions of the U.S. Constitution. And an example of this would be Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have a right to a trial with the jury, things of that nature. The book then goes into talking about Title VII discrimination. And we did hear a little bit about that in our last chapter. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was based around unlawful employment practice. And basically this was saying that failure or refuse to hire or discharge anyone based on race, religion, sex, or national origin to limit, segregate, classify, deprive employees or applicants in any way based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, to fail or refuse to refer for employment or to classify or refer employment based on race, color, sex, religion, or national origin. Even though this Civil Rights Act was brought into place in 1964, this didn't apply to educational institutions until 1972. So that was an interesting takeaway. Continuing on this topic, Title VII protects males and females from gender-based discrimination. Amended by the Civil Rights Act of 1991, this provides for compensatory damages, punitive damages, and jury trial in cases involving intentional discrimination. Victims must file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, within 180 days of an unlawful practice. Victims may file a complaint with the EEOC within 300 days if the individual has filed a claim with a local or state agency. So there was a difference there. So you have a little more wiggle room if you've already filed a claim with a local or state agency. Failure to meet these time limits results in loss of legal standing to challenge the alleged act. So you have to act within that certain time frame. Continuing on this topic, an exception to the 180-day statute of limitations was brought about, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. And this act amends the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this was based on a Supreme Court case, Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber. This decision, or the decision of a lower court, was actually reversed in this particular case. They ruled that the statute of limitations for presenting equal pay lawsuits begins at the date at which the pay was agreed upon, rather than the date of the most recent paycheck. Ledbetter, she filed a discrimination suit against Goodyear based on disparity in pay between herself and 15 male counterparts. Continue on this topic as well. To succeed under the Title VII, a plaintiff must demonstrate that the employer's reason for the challenge employment decision are false and that the actual reason is discrimination. This can be very difficult to prove due to plaintiffs having a lack of objective evidence or proof of discrimination. However, many have succeeded with indirect proof of discrimination, in which pretext for discrimination is established and the defendant was unable to convince the court that the reason for their actions was worthy of belief. An example of that in the book, a teacher or an administrator must demonstrate that he or she has made application for the position, has qualified for the position, and was not giving fair consideration for a certain position. That would be grounds for discrimination.
Hey, Daryl, how do you prove that you were given fair consideration? You're not behind the scenes, so you don't really know.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to it being very difficult to prove, because I know districts are going to say they open the position up to everybody, and they probably select them based off resumes and things of that nature. So they'll probably keep any discriminatory findings out of that. So it's very difficult. So it's a question I'm actually trying to figure out an answer to if I was in that situation.
Hey, Daryl, can I add something that might help you if you were trying to answer Lenora's question? If I'm sitting in the interview, Lenora, and you ask me a lot, you can tell by the interview and the types of questions you ask me. If you ask me a question about, well, aren't you a little old for this job? Or do you think that you're pregnant, that maybe is that going to be a problem? You know, when you give cues in your interviewing that some factor of theirs is going to be in your mind, they'll go after you in a heartbeat. They'll want to see the notes that you took in that, and it's public. The notes that you took in that interview, it can be subpoenaed to court. Those notes that you and I take when we're interviewing teachers. Yeah, so be careful. It is very, as Daryl said, it's very difficult to prove this. But if I'm walking out of that interview and thinking that, gosh, they're not hiring me because I'm old, and then you don't, and you hire this 25-year-old who's got 5 years less experience and hadn't done nearly as much as I have, I might put 2 and 2 together. So a lot of it is your cues. And the other big one is when you do have that huge discrepancy of what you said you were looking for and what you settled on.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Darren.
Oh, no problem. I'm just thinking as the interviewer, you should always just kind of talk to candidates as you're being recorded at all times. That's what I was advised to do.
And they may be recording you.
So there was a 3-step procedure for Title VII, and this was based upon 2 non-educational court cases, and they're listed there. These 3 procedures include the following. The plaintiff carries the integral burden of establishing a prima facie case of employment discrimination. The burden shifts to the defendant to refute the prima facie case by demonstrating that a legitimate non-discriminatory purpose forms the basis for its actions. If the defendant is successful in its contention, the burden shifts back to the plaintiff to show that the defendant's actions were a mere pretext for discrimination. And there was an example for this in the book. They talked about a bus driver case in which 2 bus drivers went out to have some drinks, and the next day one of the bus drivers asked his buddy to clock him in. However, he called in sick. As a result, the district dismissed both bus drivers. They challenged the ruling and said that it was unfair because female bus drivers weren't being reprimanded for clocking each other in. But the bus driver was awarded, he won the case and was awarded $175,000 by a state court. But this was taken away by a Supreme Court of Texas because they said the intent was different. It wasn't comparable to the situations involving the female bus drivers, and their intent was not to ditch work and fabricate them coming into work. So that was just an example that the book had given. Retaliation was mentioned as well. Title VII prohibits a retaliation against an individual who filed a discrimination charge, who participated in a discrimination hearing, or who opposed discrimination. Retaliation may occur when an employer takes adverse action against a protected individual who engaged in a discrimination proceeding. Adverse action is taken to discourage or prevent an individual from opposing a discriminatory practice and may be manifested by termination, demotions, or refusal to employ. Adverse action may also include unjustified negative evaluations or job references, as well as subtle or overt threats.
And a lot of times when you fire somebody, they're going to go after that retaliation. They're going to try to find something that they've done that they feel like you retaliated against them. It's a common practice. So
or if you have to give somebody a bad evaluation because they really didn't perform well at your school, they may try to say that as well.
Yeah, so have your documentation in place.
This next topic was about schools and transgender teachers. This was an interesting fact. It said there are fewer than 30 transgender teachers in classrooms across the nation. They should be treated the same way as other employees. Teachers may exercise freedom of choice, even in the context of sexual transformation in terms of transgenders. School leaders with transgender teachers in their building should hold information sessions with students and parents to respond to any questions and concerns regarding transgender issues. Now, it's not necessary for the school to embrace transgender values, but it's important to ensure that transgender teachers are treated with fairness and respect. And it's illegal to discriminate against an individual on the basis of gender. Schools and transgender teachers continue. As a result of this, the Senate passed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act of 2013 to address the history and persistent pattern of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity by private sector employees, local, state, and federal government employers. To provide explicit, comprehensive federal prohibition against employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, including meaningful and effective remedies for any such discrimination. They also wanted to take congressional powers, invoke congressional powers, including powers to enforce the 14th Amendment, to reinforce the nation's commitment to fairness and equal opportunity in the workplace. We can't make certain teachers feel uncomfortable and not feel like they're a part of the environment. So this is something to really take into consideration, especially on the last slide, having the informational session, so you're not singling somebody out on campus. The next major topic was unwed pregnant teachers. So courts tend to vary in rulings regarding unwed pregnant teachers. During the early 1960s and 1970s, courts were more inclined to rule against single teachers dismissed by school boards when they reported their pregnancy. This shifted, however, in the late 1970s and 1980s. The courts considered the teacher's overall performance record, the impact of actions with students, and the extent to which the teacher's actions adversely affect their effectiveness as a teacher. So they brought in these other considerations, not just the pregnancy. Courts may also consider community standards and the degree to which the teacher's conduct violates the ethics of the community and renders the teacher unfit to teach. Oh, sorry about those typos there, but big takeaway here, pregnancy is considered an illness and should be handled as any other illness, and those teachers should be able to take FMLA if they are falling under those requirements. Sexual discrimination. Courts simply require gender-neutral decision-making when employment opportunities are available. Discrimination based on sex is also covered under Title IX of the Educational Amendments of Act of 1972, basically stating that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Going into Title IX a little bit, this was administered by the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education. The U.S. Supreme Court actually ruled in North Haven Board of Education versus Bell. Title IX does apply and prohibit sexual discrimination in employment. The court reasoned that because Title IX neither expressly nor by implication excludes employees from its reach, it should be interpreted as covering and protecting employees as well as students. So it extends to both teachers and students. There was a debated issue regarding on the precise definition of education programs and activities, what constitutes an educational program or activity, but if it's government funded, and it should fall under Title IX protection. There was a court case mentioned as well, Grove City College versus Bell case, and then there was also a table, 9.1, that broke down a summary of Title VII and Title IX. It was a comparison of the two, so that was the interesting table. Should have included it in here, but I didn't. My apologies for that. The book also talks about the ADA and IDEA. Both of these protects individuals with disabilities against discrimination, ensures equal access and equal opportunity. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prohibits discrimination against any otherwise qualified person who has a disability with respect to employment, training, compensation, promotion, fringe benefits, and terms and conditions of employment. Section 504 protects not only students with disabilities, but any person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities as a record of such impairment or is regarded by others as having such an impairment. The book then goes to break down in depth examples of discrimination around some of the topics that I had already covered. pregnancy and public school employment, and that was kind of covered under the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978. This one was an interesting one, genetic information discrimination. I didn't know people were discriminated against their genetic makeup, but the GINA Act of 2008 protects employees under that. We have age discrimination. Dr. Stone gave a great example of that through the interview example. Religious discrimination. Trans World Airlines Incorporation versus Hardison. Basically, the airline employee challenged the airlines because he wanted to observe Saturday as a religious holiday, and they were trying to prevent him from doing that in that court case. Also, racial discrimination. The book gave Brown versus Board of Education as an example, but it also gave Griggs versus Duke Power Company, in which this employee felt like they were not hiring enough, or they weren't giving him a fair opportunity to be hired at Duke Power Company, and they were hiring other candidates. And then also gender discrimination. And this is where I'll take any questions, but my takeaway, and I misspelled that there, Russian there, but stop the hate, don't discriminate.
Good job. Any questions for Daryl? All right, Daryl, if you'll stop sharing, I got one more quick little thing I want to go with you and then turn back over to you.
Dr. Stone, if I may, I just have one quick question regarding Daryl's presentation.
Go right ahead.
If you have a student that is currently attending school in your school district, and the student has made filed a statement that a faculty member who is no longer employed at your school made sexual perversive comments to that student, what would be your responsibility as principal after reporting that to your superior? What would be the next steps? Because I'm sure an investigation would have to take place, but remember that faculty member is no longer employed in your school.
Okay. I don't even know what that stuff is. Okay. All right. One, you've notified law enforcement and you've notified your superiors. So I think that's where and you've notified human resources. I think that's where I would leave it and turn it over to them for them to do their job. I would also, and just because they no longer work for you doesn't mean, did it happen when they worked for you? It
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. You're still liable because it happened for you, or it happened during their tenure with you. So turn it over to law enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
All right, what is this? Caret browsing. Does anybody know what that is? What's cancel? All right, so under week 5, we were talking about the EESA. Here's a great guide for you, which is taking the place of No Child Left Behind. I would encourage you to look at that. And I misspelled Digital Competencies website, but here they are. Here's that the website that I showed you a little bit earlier. God, this is going to be a problem. So, the last thing I want to do before we go tonight is it obviously wants me to turn this on, doesn't it? The last thing I want to ask you is, how's it going on your PAP?
I'm trying to get a hold of the superintendent for the second meeting. He's not responding.
Have you got an assistant superintendent or someone who may be a better go-to?
Well, he is the area superintendent for our learning community, so, but I'm gonna try to continue to reach out to him. That's my only holdup right now.
All right. Anyone else? Any questions? Any problems? All right. Looking back at our schedule, we meet again on April the 6th and 7th in Charlotte. We'll start at 9 o'clock. Courtney, congratulations. Courtney will be getting married and on her honeymoon that weekend, so she will not be with us. So be the last time we see Courtney until the 24th. So congratulations, Courtney. I hope all goes well and you have a fabulous, wonderful honeymoon. But remember, we want to see you on the 24th, and you'll have to tell us what your new name is and all that stuff, and we'll have to get used to it. All right, anything else for the good of the group? If not, you all have I'll stick around if anybody needs anything, but you all have a great week.
I said I always have a question.
All right, good deal.
My
Let me
question.
turn off the recorder.
Okay. My question is, because I'm looking at the policy, I decided because it's